to our semi-regular weekly meetings here in the Committee for the Republic of Canada. Myself, I just flew back in. I've been because I know everybody here. I think I just met you today, right?
I've seen you like 6 months ago, actually.
Okay.
That's when
Right. Well, I'm giving this briefing at a moment where you have complete change happening around the world. I myself just came back from Vancouver, where I was organizing with our chapter there for the past 7 weeks. And the importance of it is that right now, all of the rules that had dominated society for the past 50, 60 years, well, really since the death of John F. Kennedy, but all of the rules that came in, the post-industrial model of society, consumerism, monetarism, this stuff wasn't formally the ethic of society before the death of John F. Kennedy. It was really only afterwards that, in the 1960s, that you started getting a serious intervention by the financial oligarchy through the whole, the rock, sex, drugs, counterculture, really driving all of the baby boomers into a complete psychopathic state of mind, where all of a sudden your friends are coming back in body bags, wars are happening for no reason, great leaders like Martin Luther King were being assassinated, and drugs, right? All of this CIA-produced drugs were just finding themselves across all the campuses of Europe and North America. So, mixed with a lot of bad philosophies, a lot of bad music that were all being pumped up heavily, this was enough to drive a whole generation into a state where they no longer believed in formerly traditional accepted truths about man and the universe. So the idea of don't trust anybody over 30, right? Don't believe in the past. Don't believe in the future. Don't believe in technological progress. Man is a virus. That's the new wisdom is man is just a pox on nature. And every time we try to change nature, it's always bad. We can't do it good. So don't try. Just adapt and be happy with what you've got. So this whole idea is this generation, which was the first time we'd really seen this in human history on that level, became the disenchanted, groups of what became the me generation in the 80s, this whole generation that adopted this irrational belief that we can just consume. We don't have to produce anything dirty like industry. We can just export those things to places that have cheaper and cheaper labor. We don't have to think about the future of our grandkids. We don't have to think about making things better. And so that's now approximately 3 generations of insanity that's been just degenerating since JFK's death. Now, all of the underlying rules of globalization that we've brought in with this grouping are now coming to a screeching halt. Right? So the economy has collapsed. That's right. I'm not saying it looks all well and good on the outside. You bought a sandwich today, you've gone shopping. The reality is it's already collapsed. We lost the economy in 2008. The system that's now dominating the world, especially the transatlantic, Europe and North America, is the bailout system. Is the system that you only have a semblance of stability, and we haven't seen the big major banks in the world collapse, bringing the world down to a chain reaction spiral because of emergency injections every month of countless billions of dollars to keep the thing afloat just a little bit longer. And it's like a drug. So that whole system is coming to a screeching halt. And what you have right now is the rise of a whole new system, which the Rouge has been talking about for 40 plus years, as the only way to save humanity is you can't make rules or work within the imperial system. You can't tweak it and regulate vice and somehow produce virtue. A whole new system, a whole new paradigm, an idea, has to be brought into place, which will replace the currently collapsing order. So, the purpose of my briefing is just going to be to flesh out certain key drivers of this, what our role has been and must continue to be in the immediate days and weeks ahead in bringing about this better system that's now beginning to really emerge and actualize itself in spite of the insanity and collapse in Europe and North America. In spite of that, you actually have an alignment towards universal truths that are being adopted, not absolutely, but they're moving in that direction towards progress, coming out of Eurasian countries, the BRICS, Shanghai Cooperation Organization countries. And this is largely through the influence of our organization. So if we here in the West are going to have any influence in moving the dynamic that we're currently on into some state of future orientation, then we have to understand certain principles. After my briefing, and I'm not going to try to go on too long now, we'll have a little Q&A if that comes up, but then we're going to transition into a weekly report from last Wednesday with some of the leadership of our organization, just having a deeper discussion about what really is a revolution, not the Jacobin anarchistic idea of revolution, which is very predominant, but what's the real Renaissance idea of the greatest minds in music and science? So we'll do that at the end, and hopefully that'll still cultivate a bit of discussion. Now, Helga Sepp-LaRouche is LaRouche's wife. She's also the founder of the Schiller Institute, our cultural organization. Like we have, for cultural warfare, we have an organization called the Schiller Institute, which you guys have probably seen a little something about, right? Heard that? You have? No? Okay. Well, this was set up in the 80s in order to make more self-conscious the idea of Friedrich Schiller as not just a poet who wrote certain nice things idealistically about human beings all being potential geniuses, but really as the embodiment of natural law, that all legitimate government and law has to emanate from an idea of mankind, which is not in harmony with the imperial model that man is an animal, right? That we're just in our essence viruses and beasts that want to satisfy our lusts and punish our enemies. So that imperial idea is what's coming down, and that's at the heart of the imperial system. The Schillerian idea, we're going to go through a little bit more, and it'll come up again and again in this briefing and in the weekly report, is a completely opposing conception. Now, Helga Sepp recently wrote a policy document where she's making the call after having come back from a high-level, multi-week-long journey with the leading establishment figures of China, and she's been, renowned in China for many, many decades as being the founder of the conception of the New Silk Road, or at least the person who's been championing it the most, since this hadn't been alive since Sun Yat-sen had died in the 1920s, the first president of China. So she made it her mission in the late 80s and 90s to champion this policy of uniting all of Eurasia with the principle of development around this conception of a new Silk Road, uniting all countries in a common mission towards rail development, industrialization, new energy sources, and just creating environments where geniuses would be able to flourish. Right? You have to just create an idea that there's a future that you're going to provide the means for the society to be able to have and participate in the development of their country and their neighbors' countries. And in so doing, you don't have to tell somebody to be good and be a genius, but it'll naturally happen as you have more requirements for engineers, for scientists, for making new breakthroughs, which wouldn't be there if you weren't trying to do anything. So that's the secret of economics. That's been understood since the American Revolution and before. She's made the point that we're going to need, in this policy document, that we're going to need a new emergency conference around the question of how should a global inclusive security architecture be designed, which will generate the existence and security of all members on this planet. That's a big idea, because a lot of people, they have a false idea of what sovereignty means, what exactly is law, what's a system, basically. And basically what she's getting across here is that, and this is what LaRouche has also been bringing up in many of his more recent discussions, is that sovereignty isn't the right to be left alone, which is what a lot of people have an idea, that sovereignty is my right to just be left alone. Let me do my thing as a sovereign person. I don't have to pay my I don't have to pay taxes. I don't have to participate in society. If I want to be left alone, I can be left alone. If my house burns down, whatever. Let my house burn down. Right? If my baby's got cancer, whatever. So be it. So you got this real self-centered, egotistical idea of sovereignty that also expresses itself with the libertarian movements, right? That sovereignty is just our right to not to just, we'll do our own thing as a nation, let everybody do their own thing. And the whole, your idea of what humanity is as a whole, really becomes just a sum of parts, right? A mosaic of different parts that are just there, and that's your idea of the whole. That's been traditionally the British imperialist definition of sovereignty that emanates also from someone named Thomas Hobbes. So the Hobbesian idea of the natural world order of nations is, you've got the weaker nations, you've got the stronger nations, everybody's selfish, everybody's a hedonist, they all want resources, and those resources are limited. You're in a closed system. So you know the strongest one because they're the ones who are able to, screw over the weaker ones. And their ability to subvert the integrity of weaker nations in the striving for diminishing resources in this dying system, right, of humanity, that is the Darwinian most powerful. They're the ones who make the definitions of what's justice. They're the ones who define the basic concepts of right, wrong, equality that everyone else has to harmonize or calibrate themselves to. Whether it's a right idea of justice or a wrong idea, it doesn't matter. It's right because they're the most powerful, because they can control the printing presses that control the dictionaries, right? So that idea, which is also globalization, right? That's why that's why you have oil cartels all over Africa and in Iraq and other things. That idea is now being replaced by what Helga's calling for, and what our organization's been calling for, of a globally inclusive security architecture. So you have to have an idea not of one world government. It doesn't mean you have to give up sovereignty of nations. That's still a sacred principle. You can't get rid of that. But you have to have an idea of a harmony of interests. Like what's going to define the behavior of all of the nations together is, well, where are our common interests? So the British Empire, what their logic is, they're saying, well, okay, we have this big collapse that we've orchestrated, but now we're going to create the new system, which is going to replace it, whereby you're going to have a system of chaos, because we're going to have a whole bunch of competing parts that are going to be under our whims, and we're going to have ethnic groups subdivided infinitely, fighting each other for whatever ideology or whatever resource we can monopolize and get dumber people to fight each other for. And they'll be so busy doing that they won't realize that they're being all screwed by the same institutions, which are us. And we'll call this global governance. We'll have a one world system. And that idea can only be stopped if we truly recognize that, well, one, it's because of that belief that we're collapsing, and two, that it's all a bluff, because their ability to destroy their opponents, to destroy countries like Russia and China and India and South Africa, and all the countries in South America that are beginning to work with the BRICS orientation, their ability to actually overthrow them doesn't exist. It's a bluff. They're threatening it, but it's not real. So you see this right now with a series of massive, if any one singular nation, if India alone, or if Russia alone, or China alone, were actually trying to take a stand now against the New World Order, if they were actually doing that, they would be crushed. It wouldn't work if any individual country tried. If Egypt tried to do what they're doing now by building the new Suez Canal with national banking state bonds, if they tried to do that by themselves, if this was 5 years ago, forget about it. That would not work out. But the fact that you have a coalition right now of the BRICS countries representing all these different ethnic groups, right, different religious groupings, right? You have the most broadly diverse spectrum of cultures who are all finding a common ground of principle, both in a negative sense because they see the West is collapsing, they see that there's an oncoming war that's being pushed, and they want to survive. So you have a desire for survival as one aspect. But then, as we saw coming out of the Xi Jinping Narendra Modi meeting in India, what we're seeing is the biggest program of bilateral agreements towards science, technology, education programs. You have the creation of a massive science university amongst these countries that's being established now to transform a whole generation into thinking like scientists. Where currently you just have a lot of peasants. So you have, this is coming out of the speeches that were given by both Narendra Modi as well as Xi Jinping involved, being very clear that we're getting rid of geopolitics. This Hobbesian geopolitics of each against all, we're going to drop it. Even though you've had a conflict between India and China, these countries have been at war in the 60s, right? So you've had constant territorial conflicts being manipulated. They said, no, we're not going to fall into this trap anymore. We've both been fucked over for many, many years by the same British Empire. Whether it's opium wars in China or whether it's massive controlled famines by India, it's the same empire. They now recognize increasingly who's really running the show, who's really controlling Wall Street. So they've come out of this with the most broad spectrum of economic agreements. You have Russia and India making huge bilateral agreements similarly around the most advanced nuclear technology, like fast-breed nuclear reactors, which only India and Russia now have, which are actually the type of nuclear technologies, which it's incredible. You're dealing with stuff that's going to create 3 times more, or 2 or 3 times more fuel than you started off with. You're actually creating more fuel by using that than you started off with. Which you could imagine if you're a British oligarch controlling BP Oil, Royal Dutch Shell, all these oil and mineral cartels, how afraid you're going to be if these countries actually demonstrate this principle that you don't control, you don't monopolize this capability. So you have this happening. You have Russia and China having the biggest gas deals of $400+ billion. You have the idea of the Silk Road rail development, which we'll get into a little bit more towards the end. And this is contagious. You have countries that are not immediately part of the BRICS or the Shanghai Cooperation Organization who are being infected by this in a beautiful way. And I use infection not in the Ebola sense here. But you actually have the president of Argentina going to meet with, or the foreign minister of Argentina meeting with President El-Sisi of Egypt, and actually discussing Egypt-Argentina bilateral arrangements around long-term development, using the Egyptian model, right, for investing with state bonds, not IMF, not World Bank loans, but actual internally generated bonds from the nation, invested in by the people for these actual projects of creating 1.5 million jobs of engineers to revolutionize the Egyptian economy as a whole. Where Argentina is going for an aggressive nuclear energy development program with China, with Russia, right? They're actually uniting. And you have even places as unlikely as we thought. We never thought that this type of thing would be adopted in a place like Bolivia, right? Bolivia, which had formerly been a complete eco-fascist run government at the beginning when Evo Morales first came in. And you've had a complete transformation in the past year where this has culminated because of this whole new development with the vice president, no, Morales himself, giving a speech on the 20th, 2 days ago, where he's providing, he's announcing 14,000 laptops for high school students in Santa Cruz. And he says, now we have the task of liberating ourselves in the area of science. That is the huge responsibility we have, and we have plans to build science cities to which people will come to get their master's and doctorate degrees. His vice president on the same day gave a speech, Garcia Linera in La Paz gave a speech saying Bolivia has freed itself from the foreign domination by nationalizing its natural resources and moving aggressively towards industrialization. It must next develop what's called the economy of knowledge. And this is the same guy who just gave a speech calling for Bolivia to embrace the Promethean fire of nuclear power and not to be held back by use. He actually used this type of language, which this is not common for a world leader today in a great or small country to actually use that type of very powerful language. Because as people will come to know, if you don't already know already, the idea of nuclear power has been not just destroyed through media propaganda for decades, but nations have been overthrown since the 70s every time there's been an attempt, really since the 60s. But every time that there's been a strong attempt for a country to break free of the empire and have energy sovereignty of the highest quality to educate its population and think ahead, these countries have been overthrown by either assassination, military run coups, or what have you, usually by the IMF and the World Bank, the bankers in London and Wall Street, and the whole shadow government that's associated with them. And we've documented this for 40 years. So there's been an intention to keep these countries from accessing nuclear power, because this moves us not only into a place where we have cheap, abundant, energy of the highest quality, but you also educate your people, because you're having a nuclear system, like a society of nuclear technicians. It means you have to really have a very bright population, which empires hate. They don't mind it if people are like shoveling coal into a furnace or like scrubbing, squeegeeing,
Cars.
Huh?
Squeegeeing cars, the squeegee.
Cars, or the energy analog to that is, solar panels.
Yeah.
But that they hate it when a country actually thinks about nuclear power, also because it brings us towards the next immediate breakthrough, which is nuclear fusion. As soon as you start moving and understanding the atom in a practical way, all of a sudden your ability to accelerate your drive towards making the breakthrough into nuclear fusion power, and then everything beyond that is on a fast track. So again, these are all policies you see coming out of the BRICS countries. 70% of the nuclear power is being developed by the BRICS countries, not by the collapsing West. In the collapsing West, we're seeing nothing more than austerity. We're seeing bailouts of banks that don't work. We're seeing bail-ins coming in to confiscate people's bank deposits. Budget cuts galore, healthcare workers are being thrown under the bus, euthanasia is coming in, drug legalization is being pushed to make revenues. So you have a completely insane idea of what do we do in a crisis coming out of the misleadership of the Western governments versus the actual leadership coming out of countries that can think. The idea also, if you kind of pose that also to the climate conference, we've got a massive climate conference happening on Tuesday. I forget which country is hosting it, but this is bringing together all of the different countries as a precursor to the next year's Paris Summit, which is supposed to be what, the idea of this is to promote what the empire believes they failed to do with Copenhagen in 2009, which was solidify binding agreements to just lower the world's carbon emissions and That's really just another way of saying
India and China walked out.
India and China sabotaged it, and the idea of lowering carbon emissions. Well, it's because the reason why they walked out is because they knew that this means depopulation. This means a slow kill, or even become a faster kill to their entire population. And no nuclear power, obviously. That's very, we don't want that. So that's not even part of the discussion basket. Now, this is the type of insanity from the Hobbesian view, the Westphalian idea, or this idea of the benefit of the other, that the law, the authority that we make our laws around, or that develops our country's relations with each other, emanates from the benefit of our neighbors and with considerations into the future and into the past. That is the Westphalian idea which the empire has been trying to kill for a long time. But this is the idea that we're seeing coming out of the BRICS. So the thing driving this right now, the way that they're attacking this is through three types of warfare. You have three types of warfare. You have economic warfare, you have asymmetric warfare, and you have actual warfare that's being prepared. Now, this is always something you have to put on the front of any discussion you're going to have politically around what's going on in the world. Because most people, if they're not thinking about the context of the whole being more than the sum of its parts, if they're not thinking in those terms, their ability to evaluate what's going on really with ISIS in Syria, in Iraq, in Egypt, in any country, any part, is incompetent. You have no context. How could you know possibly what you're talking about if you're not thinking about the whole? So when you think about the whole, we're looking at the economic collapse. The banks are bankrupt. The oligarchs are bluffing. They don't have the ability to subvert even a country like Argentina or Egypt or Bolivia, though they're trying. They can't even do that anymore. And you have what's setting the pace for everything else is this, well, can everybody see what's going on here? I'm sure most people have seen this map. But Stefan, if you haven't seen this, have you looked at this map?
Not yet.
Okay. How do I zoom in?
Just press the up arrow.
All right, so what we're seeing here is the entire push for confrontation with Russia and China run by the Anglo-Dutch American system, NATO. So what you have here is the NATO encirclement with anti-Russian missile systems called the anti-ballistic missile shield, which is accelerating its development all across the southern perimeter of Russia, all the way down to Turkey. And with a US-led system doing the exact same thing around China and the Pacific called the, also known as the Air Sea Battle Plan. So this program has been underway now for about 5 years. This idea began with Dick Cheney. In the case of the Pacific, it's begun really in an accelerated fashion only after China and India sabotaged the Copenhagen conference in 2009 when they said no, they were not going to commit suicide for the sake of the empire. And as soon as they shifted policies and made that their open intention, you had a complete shift where Obama began to announce an accelerating drive for war with China by encircling them in the Philippines, in Indonesia, in Japan. Philippines and Japan being the two most psychotic countries right now in the Asian region, where territorial conflicts are the name of the game that are being manipulated artificially around Senkaku, Diaoyu Islands. Japan says it's theirs. China says, well, no, the maps that we've been using for 300 years have stated it's been ours, and that we all agreed for a long time, and all of a sudden, that's not the case. So you have a whole war being pushed over some random islands there. You have in the Pacific what's called the South China Sea. The Filipino government, who's a little bitch for Obama, he's really a president, is a little carbon copy of Obama, is saying no, it's the South Philippine Sea, not China. So what they're not saying is that, or what they tend to not talk about when the media discusses these things, is how both Philippines and Japan are building up massive American military systems on their borders, which are all part of a cohesive program that also involves Australia, which has a massive increase of U.S. military systems, as really a confrontation with China that's being prepared over a grouping of people in the Pentagon and in London who control the CIA, who actually believe that the U.S. is capable of winning a nuclear war. It's called full spectrum dominance. So you have some people who are computer modelers. They don't think about reality, but they are systems analysts. They think in computer terms, and the programs that they've created, those computer models, say that they can win a thermonuclear war. It's completely insane. And this is where you actually have a revolt inside of the U.S. military, which is also important to keep in mind, and I'll develop that in a second. Because there is a revolt, a massive one happening against this psychotic faction, even in the United States, and against Obama within the highest levels of the US military, which is important for people to know because it's not something that, again, is covered in the media in general. The other two types of war that is being waged, as we know, are economic warfare, speculation against countries that are not cooperating, sanctions, which we're seeing now being deployed en masse. We saw them previously in the case of Syria and Iran, but now we're seeing them en masse being deployed to Russia, which aren't really working. In fact, what we're finding is that this is not only destroying the empire's own environment, because what you're having with these sanctions is that 100,000 farming families of France, 300,000 farming families of Germany are being thrown under the bus or being destroyed, because now you have no exports of agricultural products coming out of Germany and out of France into Russia, a former major buying partner, and neither do you have food coming from Russia into Europe, nor do you potentially have actual gas coming out of Russia into Europe too, which can be shut off at any moment. So Russia is actually in the driver's seat, even though these hotheads are trying so hard to bring them to their knees. The fact is they're actually destroying the European population and their own bases, while at the same time driving Russia and any other country that they're trying to attack, like Argentina, right? You just go through the list. All of the countries that are under attack through economic warfare are simply being driven closer and closer into tighter alignment over a common principle. So you have Russia now working more closely with the Shanghai Cooperation Organizations, with South America, with Argentina, where Argentina is now compensating for the loss of food that Europe is not exporting. You have them now helping these countries develop a real measure of sovereignty, economic and political, in spite of this. So you actually have this helping, ironically, the BRICS orientation. Now, the other aspect, which will tie into what I just said about the revolt in the military, the other aspect of war that the empire is waging against these countries is asymmetric war. Asymmetric war is simply, this is symmetrical war. Technically, if you want to get into the military terminology, symmetrical war is you got a power, you got another power, and they go at it. World War I, World War II, these were symmetric wars, so-called. Asymmetric war was something that we've seen increasingly developed during the time of the Cold War, when you had some geopoliticians who realized, well, shit, if we actually go along with the old policy of symmetric warfare and there's thermonuclear bombs everywhere, isn't that going to work against us? So someone had the bright idea that, okay, we'll actually probably destroy ourselves too, and came up with a new doctrine of military affairs. This is Samuel P. Huntington, this is Bernard Lewis, this is Zbigniew Brzezinski, who developed the idea of, okay, what we'll do is we can destabilize countries by promoting radical ideologies. We'll promote Mujahideen, radical Islamists in the Middle East. We'll do that in Africa. We'll do this. We'll do the same thing with hardcore nutjob Zionists like Netanyahu. We'll do this with hardcore psychopathic Christians like George Bush.
That's when they become with the idea of US aid.
And the USA becomes hated, right? Because their actual character as an anti-imperial nation is subverted. And the enemies of humanity, the British Empire, which before JFK died, everyone knew that the real evil system in the world was the British imperial system. They still saw America as a beacon, an anti-imperial beacon for progress. That's lost, and increasingly all of the hate that formerly was being directed, rightfully so, to England, was over time, as America was taken over by this foreign agency, this whole banking apparatus of London, as started behaving like a marcher lord for the controllers in London, the world's hate started moving towards more and more the United States. So now most people tend, just because they don't know how the system works, they tend to think of the American empire as the evil thing, and don't realize that there's been something, that's infested it like a parasite. And these ideologies of asymmetrical warfare, funding terrorism, like you have with Al-Qaeda, right? The whole thing was created by the West to attack the Soviet Union when they were in Afghanistan. Now all of a sudden we're saying, oh, okay, that's the reason why we had to bomb Afghanistan and Iraq. Right? That's what we're saying now. That's why we had to bomb Libya, was because of terrorist groups that were created by the West, by the MI6, by the CIA, and now we're saying we have to go at it for a third time in Iraq. We have to go at it, even though well, actually, what they're saying now is we have to prepare for another Iraq war. So Obama's just gone to Congress. not even got on the Congress, we went to a couple of people in the Congress, a couple of puppets, and basically said, well, ISIS is a problem. ISIS is a really bad deal. We have to destroy ISIS. So what we'll do, we're going to start bombing Syria and Iraq.
Again.
And,
Iran.
and Iran.
Probably not.
And probably Iran too.
Let me ask you something.
Yeah.
Like, it's not even 5 months ago
Yeah.
when John McCain was taking pictures with the boss of ISIS, right?
Yeah.
And they were I mean, John McCain actually
Yes.
was pushing so hard actually to give them arms when they didn't put a tag name on them. Now it's the whole parade for the stupid people, right? That.
Yes.
But I mean, ISIS is nothing, and actually ISIS is the only one group, right, that has the right to sell oil, right, through a United Nations recognized company which is called Amro. And they sell the oil that they're stealing. Well, they have been doing that since 2003 anyway, since they started bombing Iraq. That was the whole reason.
Yeah.
But I mean.
It's complete lies. It's a total charade, right? And if you just look at it clearly, the amount of hypocrisy is out of this world. Because on the one hand, they're saying we're going to start bombing countries that we've been trying to bomb for a long time, but pesky countries like China and Russia stopped us. The last time we tried to bomb Syria. Now all of a sudden they're saying we're going to bomb them, but for another reason. We don't want to. This is not against Assad. Okay, we just want to get the hardcore terrorists, the ones that we've been actually helping to have arms and money. But in the same breath, you have on September the 11th of this year, you have John McCain, while this whole discourse is going on, in Saudi Arabia, saying, okay, we have a great plan with the Saudis. They're going to help us train Syrian rebel fighters to overthrow Assad. But it's okay. But then you ask, well, aren't the rebel fighters? Didn't we already prove that these are like completely infested with Al-Qaeda operatives, with Jabhat al-Nusra, with ISIS? Like, didn't we already establish that? And the only response you get, this type of thing was asked of Obama and of Kerry on many occasions. They say, no, it's okay. We'll arm them and train the moderate ones in Saudi Arabia. So we're going to take $500 million of taxpayer money. We're going to give it to Saudi Arabia to arm and train Syrian rebel fighters, only good ones, who pass the multiple choice test of being secular or not. And then, while we're doing that, we're going to bomb Syria and Iraq, and possibly Iran. And Obama comes out and says as well, if Assad, in the context of our completely noble intervention into Syria to bomb these ISIS groups, if in the course of that Assad should try to stop us from stopping international terrorism by shooting at our planes that are bombing his country, well, that's an act of war.
That is not
Well, they're trying again actually and actually that's one of the reasons, one of the proxy reasons actually to get again back in Syria. And actually last week, Obama just blamed Syria again that they did a chlorine attack on in Aleppo.
He blamed them again.
Last week in Aleppo.
There you go. So this is the thing. People just their memory is the level of amnesia is dangerously high. But still, people aren't buying it. Like in general, like the fact that they think that they can get away with saying the same shit again and again, year after year, and just presume that maybe weapons of mass destruction, people will believe it this time around. It's mind-boggling how stupid these people are. Because even though they're trying to ram it through, you have a backlash because of the level of lies, even within the U.S. military. And this is where you get, when I was saying that there was a fight within the military against the psycho groupings in the CIA and around Obama who believe that they can win a nuclear war. This is where you actually have clear and plain as day a visible fight between General Martin Dempsey, the head of the U.S. Joint Chiefs of Staff, who not only has been trying to fight rearguard actions to stop this from happening and making the point that we never actually proved that there ever were chemical weapons in Syria. We never proved that there was ever any intention for Iran to develop a nuclear weapons capability. And this guy's been, because he's been out intervening on the lies so consistently over the past several years, you haven't had a complete war yet. Now, the bad news is, well, he made an intervention also to say, okay, well, let's fight ISIS. Okay, if you want to fight ISIS, let's fight ISIS, but we have to do it with the Syrian government, with the Iraqi, with the Iranian government, with them, not again. That was a bold intervention. It was supported by Russia, supported by China, and most everybody in the world, really. But now with this whole maneuver to try to just, not ask the Congress for permission, not ask the Syrian government for permission when they're going to conduct a bombing campaign, Obama's playing with impeachment right now. Because you already have had, as of about 6 weeks ago, a major bill passed in the Congress, not in the Senate, but in the Congress.
In the House.
In the House of Representatives. With 420 or something or 380 to like 50, for this bill to pass, which makes effectively the act of bombing a country without a congressional vote of assent, an act of impeachment, an impeachable offense.
A month ago now?
About a month, yeah.
Yeah.
Not if you
Yeah.
allow.
Sure.
The thing is, it's attack against the UN Security Council. Because this is the aspect, the thing is, the bombing of a sovereign nation, like in the case of Syria,
Mm-hmm.
is not just a violation of the right of Syrians, this is the violation of the United Nations.
Yes.
So if this occurred, this is overthrowing, the last post-World War II, legal system we're having internationally is against assault on Russia and China.
Yeah. Yeah, because still, even to this very day, even though the United Nations has been infiltrated by all sorts of psychopaths and utopians, nonetheless, in its charter, it still establishes clearly that the authority of the United Nations emanates from also the respect for sovereign nations. It's not supposed to be a one world government body in its charter. So the fact that you're right, one nation can go and do that and bypass the Security Council.
You can attack under the Security Council authorization, like in the case of the Iraq War, you can do it, but you have to have Russia, China, and India.
Yeah, the problem is Russia and China are both members of the Security Council, so that's not going to happen. We're still all part of also this isolating of Russia on the one side too. So you've got multi-levels, but the overarching thing is that there's a push for nuclear war. The banking system, the whole transatlantic is in a state of a collapse. And they can't coexist in a world where Russia, China, and the BRICS countries as a whole are going for a serious program for development cooperation based on a completely different paradigm of value. So the weak spot in this whole fight is ironically what we've seen. If you guys go to our website, you'll see a press conference with 9/11 families and 3 representatives from the U.S. federal government. Have you guys seen the press conference for the families for 9/11 truth to expose the 20 classified pages? You should do that tonight. It's very good. But there's been a bill called Ehret 428 introduced by one of our allies in the federal government of the U.S., Walter Jones.
Not the federal government, in the Congress.
Congress is part of the federal government. There's state and federal government. It's part of the federal. That's true. So Walter Jones and 2 other senators have been joined by 2 other congressmen have been joined by 12 others to expose 28 classified pages that were first classified by Bush and then reclassified by Obama, even though he promised the 9/11 families, the victims of 9/11, that he would release them on 2 occasions, which all deal with the support, the role of the Saudi government in supporting and providing infrastructure to protect and maintain the Saudi operatives who were all engaged in the 9/11 project in 2001, which was done with the complicity of Dick Cheney and the whole grouping of neocons in the United States. It was done with British money from a massive deal that was done in the 80s with the City of London. And this 28 pages completely exposes the role of the monarchy in the Gulf states, especially Saudi Arabia, in sustaining these different Saudi operatives, not Afghani operatives, not Iraqis, even though there was Iraq and Afghanistan we bombed. Not a single operative who took out, who played a role in the 9/11 operation were either Iraqi or Afghani. They were Saudi. And what these 28 pages would expose, and one of the members of the 9/11 committee, Bob Graham, who was at that time a senator on the 9/11 committee, he made the point, and he's been championing the exposure of these pages that have been classified. So only if you're an elected federal official are you allowed to even read them, and you can't even talk about what you read. But everybody who's read them so far have been horrified. Yes?
So where did we get this information that it is related to Saudi Arabia?
Well, you have open source, like you have public exposed information, and a lot of this you'll find on our website, like we've made even documentaries going through the Saudi, for example, there was the Saudi ambassador, Prince Bandar bin Sultan, to the United States, was caught red-handed with a bank account directed into 3 of the known hijackers directly, and the money's been traced back to a Thatcher Rothschild operation in the 80s. So this stuff has been already, it's there accessible, but what you're going to find in the actual 28 pages is going to even blow the lid off of that.
You know,
Also, Senator Bob Graham,
Yeah.
the guy who authored the 28 pages, who led the Senate investigation of the 28 pages, after he retired, he wrote books, he's given radio interviews.
Oh, yeah.
He's a former senator, and his material is also out there for
Yeah,
people
it's
to.
very
He wrote a
They're not
fiction
allowed
book.
to talk about it, but they're allowed to express their.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
But that's the guy that is like 82 years old, that he's already old.
He's pretty.
He's up there. Was that there?
Bob Graham had written a fiction book called Keys to the Kingdom, where he makes up a story, and it's all these hypothetical, it's called Keys to the Kingdom, and it goes through all the relationships of, characters and their dealings. And so it's basically the same thing, so you have some smart people out there who are waging this kind of intelligence war, where although you can't use any of this in court, it's really just, shining the light on where you have to go if you want the truth.
Yeah, like for example, he just made in an interview he just recently gave on September 14th, he said, "I believe that the failure to shine a full light on Saudi actions, in particular its involvement in 9/11, has contributed to the Saudi ability to continue to engage in actions that are damaging to the U.S. and, in particular, their support for ISIS." All I have to say, I mean, you gotta go for the supply lines. This is an old understanding in all military conflict going back centuries. Is you don't attack an enemy head on, especially one that's so, non-defined as a terrorist movement. It's an ideology. It's not so much it's not a country that you can define as an outline of what this is. The supply lines are what? Where do terrorists get their funding from? Well, if you can identify that you have an entire banking system, a British-run Qatar and Saudi Arabian institution which is supplying massive aid, financial, military, otherwise, to terrorist groups. If you know that drug profits from Afghanistan are a major means by which the terrorist groups internationally supply themselves with the arms, with the training and everything else, if you know these things are the case, remove those.
And what happens with the people that they have on the UN Security Council? Because there's even people that they have in the Security Council that allow these things to happen, these schemas to happen. Like for instance, the Amro company, right? Amro company is like well established. You have a lot of blonde people, nice ties and stuff like that, but they are just funding terrorists.
Well, this is where you really need to go for the top, because there's operatives on every level of government, on the IMF, the World Bank, inside the U.S., inside of European governments. You've got so many self-conscious, there's different types of operatives. You have those who are just ideological, and they don't really know what they're a part of, but because their ideology, you could maybe say Stephen Harper falls into that category. But because of his ideology, because of the people who are immediately controlling his perceptions, they're very useful.
Yeah.
Then on a higher level, you have people who are a little bit more aware of what they're doing. You have the Henry Kissingers, you have the people like George Soroses, who are sociopathic. They also have their own ideology, but they're a little bit more aware of the broader beast that they're servants for. Above that, you have a series of banking families. You have a group of the old nobility, the old families, the old bloodlines of Europe, that think that they're gods, that everybody else who's not born into their special caste or is part of their managers are overpopulated. We're excess people, or if we are allowed to stay alive, that we should be underpopulated, not have too much knowledge, just under control. So what you want to do is go for the top. The place that they're bankrupt. The way you're going to get them, the way you're going to stop them, isn't by actually just trying to take on the U.S. military.
No.
It's actually by passing Glass-Steagall. If you pass the place right now, Glass-Steagall, if this law is invoked, you're going to bankrupt the entire international financial system. You're going to put it through bankruptcy because it's going to collapse anyway. So you're going to say, let's let the part that's going to blow up anyway not take the real economy down with it. Let's separate that, let that bomb quarantine, blow it up, but whatever is real in the normal banking system, like people's savings, pensions, agriculture, and the things that maintain stability, that will be protected. And that's what Glass-Steagall did in the 1930s, and that's what it will do again today by being put into place. And that you have people like Walter Jones, one of the key co-sponsors of this bill to expose the 28 pages, who's also the key endorser of the restoration of the Glass-Steagall bill, is not a coincidence. He's also the guy who introduced the legislation to impeach Obama for bombing a country without congressional consent, which Obama has now committed himself to doing with the case of Syria. So the fact that you actually have an intelligentsia, even though he's nominally a Republican, he's been coming out again attacking all the Republican hordes as well. And you have Democrats working with him who are attacking the Democratic horse. So you have the parties breaking down and people now realizing on every level that it's now or never that you're going to make the change. And if you don't do it now, you're going to have thermonuclear war. So Glass-Steagall has to be brought in. If you do that, the entire support for terrorism is going to be shut down. The ability for these banks like HSBC, JP Morgan, and other banks to actually launder the drug money, which is necessary to support the terrorists, Saudi Arabia plays a big role in that, you're going to choke that off. So then you have to have development. Because again, the major cause of terrorism isn't just an ideology. It's not that case. It's that you have a lack of future. Like these people who become terrorists, they usually don't have any other, in their minds, they don't think that they have any other choice. They're offered, a few $100 to like have a gun and listen to this, Teva Imam, and they have no future otherwise. There's no running water in Afghanistan to speak of really, and you don't have a lot of education, you don't have a lot of, electricity for most people. So you provide development. You give people a chance to develop real skills as engineers, right? You just do that on a mass basis, and you're going to create an environment where terrorism will not be able, or ignorant ideologies will have less and less of a chance to sink into the population. So you got to give people a sense of hope, but that's also why this is happening, because the issue is not getting rid of ISIS. It's introduce chaos all across Eurasia. Chaos is the intention. They want chaos.
That's how they rule the world.
They need.
Yeah.
They need it. Yeah, if they don't have fear and chaos, you don't have an empire. So their idea right now is one last ditch shot to just spread fire across North Africa, across the Middle East, and do everything possible to try to break up Eurasia and try to stop what? What are they trying to stop? Well, look at the New Silk Road, the Eurasian land bridge, the development of the Bering Strait. These are all the programs that are being put in place now by Russia and China and India. Mongolia is being brought in next year's Shanghai Cooperation Organization Summit. Mongolia is being brought in as a full member of the SCO. Mongolia is a key nation right now. It's underpopulated, it's underdeveloped, there's only 2 million people, but without them on board, if they're sucked into the whole NATO doctrine, as you've had the Governor General of Canada go to Mongolia to celebrate the life of Genghis Khan and promote him as their national hero. Genghis Khan. John Baer did the same. They were trying to seduce Mongolia into becoming part of NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, right? A North Atlantic country, landlocked. It's insane.
NATO has no basis for existence because it was against Soviet Union.
Well,
Soviet Union doesn't exist.
But
It's crazy.
there's two reasons there. Canada has a lot of mining companies,
Yes.
and they're sitting in a gold
Yes.
mine.
Tons. So it's all monetary. Their incentives were all monetary, and what the leadership of Mongolia is now realizing through bilateral discussions with India and China and Russia is that no, it's not a monetary question. Our survival is dependent upon a higher conception. So all I'm saying is that you have them joining to the SCO next year in 2015. You have India and Pakistan, both now they're just observers, but they're going to become full members next year at that same summit. That makes it really hard to start a war. If you're a rich imperialist, you don't like that. How are you going to get India and China to fight, or India and Pakistan to fight? Sri Lanka also being integrated.
Nice.
So you have a complete unifying conception, which this is the real issue, that they're trying to break that potential up because it's spreading fast in countries in Europe. Germany, which just kicked out not that long ago the CIA director of Germany for the whole NSA thing that they've got going on there. Great maneuver. But you actually now have serious discussion getting louder and louder for countries of Europe to break out of the euro because they see the euro as a Titanic. They see it.
I have a question. What happens with Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan, and Kazakhstan?
Ilko.
They're all to be integrated into the new Silk Road. That's exactly what the Silk Road is.
To our semi-regular weekly meetings here in the Committee for the Republic of Canada. Myself, I just flew back in. I've been because I know everybody here. I think I just met you today, right?
I've seen you like 6 months ago, actually.
Okay.
That's when
Right. Well, I'm giving this briefing at a moment where you have complete change happening around the world. I myself just came back from Vancouver where I was organizing with our chapter there for the past 7 weeks. And the importance of it is that right now, all of the rules that had dominated society for the past 50, 60 years, well, really since the death of John F. Kennedy, but all of the rules that came in, the post-industrial model of society, consumerism, monetarism, this stuff wasn't formally the ethic of society before the death of John F. Kennedy. It was really only afterwards that, in the 1960s, they started getting a serious intervention by the financial oligarchy through the whole, the rock, sex, drugs, counterculture, really driving all of the baby boomers into a complete psychopathic state of mind, where all of a sudden your friends are coming back in body bags, wars are happening for no reason, great leaders like Martin Luther King were being assassinated, and drugs, right? All of this CIA-produced drugs were just finding themselves across all the campuses of Europe and North America. So, mixed with a lot of bad philosophies, a lot of bad music that were all being pumped up heavily, this was enough to drive a whole generation into a state where they no longer believed in formally traditional accepted truths about man and the universe. So the idea of don't trust anybody over 30, right? Don't believe, and just creating environments where geniuses would be able to flourish, right? You have to just create an idea that there's a future that you're going to provide the means for the society to be able to have and participate in the development of their country and their neighbors' countries. And in so doing, you don't have to tell somebody to be good and be a genius, but it'll naturally happen as you have more requirements for engineers, for scientists, for making new breakthroughs, which wouldn't be there if you weren't trying to do anything. So that's the secret of economics. That's been understood since the American Revolution and before. She's made the point that we're going to need, in this policy document, that we're going to need a new emergency conference around the question of how should a global inclusive security architecture be designed, which will generate the existence and security of all members on this planet. That's a big idea, because a lot of people, they have a false idea of what sovereignty means, what exactly is law, what's a system, basically. And basically what she's getting across here is that, and this is what LaRouche has also been bringing up in many of his more recent discussions, is that sovereignty isn't the right to be left alone, which is what a lot of people have an idea, that sovereignty is my right to just be left alone, let me do my thing as a sovereign person, I don't have to pay I don't have to pay taxes, I don't have to participate in society, if I want to be left alone, I can be left alone. My house burns down, whatever, let my house burn down, right? My baby's got cancer, whatever, so be it. So you got this real self-centered, egotistical idea of sovereignty that also expresses itself with the libertarian movements, right? That sovereignty is just our right to not to just, we'll do our own thing as a nation, let everybody do their own thing. And the whole, your idea of what humanity is as a whole, really becomes just a sum of parts, right? A mosaic of different parts that are just there, and that's your idea of the whole. LaRouche has been talking about for 40 plus years as the only way to save humanity is you can't make rules or work within the imperial system. You can't tweak it and regulate vice and somehow produce virtue. A whole new system, a whole new paradigm, an idea has to be brought into place which will replace the currently collapsing order. So the purpose of my briefing is just going to be to flesh out certain key drivers of this, what our role has been and must continue to be in the immediate days and weeks ahead in bringing about this better system that's now beginning to really emerge and actualize itself in spite of the insanity and collapse in Europe and North America. In spite of that, you actually have an alignment towards universal truths that are being adopted, not absolutely, but they're moving in that direction towards progress, coming out of Eurasian countries, the BRICS, Shanghai Cooperation Organization countries. And this is largely through the influence of our organization. So if we here in the West are going to have any influence in moving the dynamic that we're currently on into some state of future orientation, then we have to understand certain principles. After my briefing, and I'm not going to try to go on too long now, we'll have a little Q&A if that comes up, but then we're going to transition into a weekly report from last Wednesday with some of the leadership of our organization, just having a deeper discussion about what really is a revolution, not the Jacobin anarchistic idea of a revolution, which is very predominant, but what's the real Renaissance idea of the greatest minds in music and science. So we'll do that at the end, and hopefully that'll still cultivate a bit of discussion. Now, Helga LaRouche is LaRouche's wife. She's also the founder of the Schiller Institute, our cultural organization, like we have in the past. Don't believe in the future. Don't believe in technological progress. Man is a virus. That's the new wisdom is man is just a pox on nature. And every time we try to change nature, it's always bad. We can't do it good. So don't try. just adapt and be happy with what you got. So this whole idea, this generation, which was the first time we'd really seen this in human history on that level, became the disenchanted, groups of what became the me generation in the 80s, this whole generation that adopted this irrational belief that we can just consume. We don't have to produce anything dirty like industry. We can just export those things to places that have cheaper and cheaper labor. We don't have to think about the future of our grandkids. We don't have to think about making things better. And so that's now approximately 30 generations of insanity that's been just degenerating since JFK's death. Now, all of the underlying rules of globalization that we've brought in with this grouping are now coming to a screeching halt. Right? So the economy has collapsed. And that's right. I'm not saying it looks all well and good on the outside. You bought a sandwich today, you've gone shopping. The reality is it's already collapsed. We lost the economy in 2008. The system that's now dominating the world, especially the transatlantic, Europe and North America, is the bailout system. Is the system that you only have a semblance of stability, and we haven't seen the big major banks in the world collapse, bringing the world down to a chain reaction spiral because of emergency injections every month of countless billions of dollars to keep the thing afloat just a little bit longer. And it's like a drug. So that whole system is coming to a screeching halt. And what you have right now is the rise of a whole new system, which for cultural warfare we have an organization called the Schiller Institute, which you guys have probably seen a little something about, right? You've heard that? You have? No? Okay. Well, this was set up in the 80s in order to make more self-conscious the idea of Friedrich Schiller as not just a poet who wrote certain nice things idealistically about human beings all being potential geniuses, but really as the embodiment of natural law, that all legitimate government and law has to emanate from an idea of mankind, which is not in harmony with the imperial model that man is an animal, right? That we're just in our essence viruses, beasts that want to satisfy our lusts and punish our enemies. So that imperial idea is what's coming down, and that's at the heart of the imperial system. The Schillerian idea, we're going to go through a little bit more, and it'll come up again and again in this briefing and in the weekly report, is a completely opposing conception. Now, Helga Tsepp recently wrote a policy document where she's making the call after having come back from a high-level, multi-week-long journey with the leading establishment figures of China, and she's been, renowned in China for many, many decades as being the founder of the conception of the New Silk Road, or at least the person who's been championing it the most, since this hadn't been alive since Sun Yat-sen had died in the 1920s, the first president of China. So she made it her mission in the late 80s and 90s to champion this policy of uniting all of Eurasia with the principle of development around this conception of a new Silk Road, uniting all countries in a common mission towards rail development, industrialization, new energy sources,